Cool. We are live. All right. Hi,
Yes.
my name is Mark from Green Apple Books in San Francisco. Thanks for joining us tonight for our event. We have a list of events posted on our website where you can find them at greenapplebooks.com/events. Next week on October 21st, we'll be introducing Andrea Lowe and Valerie Liu's Chinatown Pretty at 7 p.m. And on October 27th, David Lazar will be joining us for a reading from his new book, Celeste Holmes Syndrome, at 7 p.m. I hope everyone has a chance to tune in. Tonight we have Bett Williams, a literary writer and psychedelic explorer, and the author of The Wrestling Party and Girl Walking Backwards, which was named as one of the 10 best young adult queer novels by Vogue magazine. She has written for several publications, including Double Blind, Out Magazine, Flaunt, Lucid News, and Lenny Letters. And joining alongside that, we have Juli Delgado Lopera, if I'm pronouncing that correct. Julie is an award-winning Colombian writer, historian, speaker, and storyteller based right here in San Francisco. They're the author of the New York Times acclaimed novel Fiber Tropical, which came out March 2020 from the Feminist Press. Julie is also the author of Hierme and Cuentamelo, an illustrated bilingual collection of oral histories by LGBT Latinx immigrants, which won a 2018 Lambda Literary Award and a 2018 Independent Publisher Book Award. And for tonight's book, The Wild Kindness, a Psilocybin Odyssey, the reason we're here tonight, please join me in welcoming Bett Williams and Juli Lopera. You may take it away.
Awesome. Well, I'm very excited to be here. Again, very excited to see your face, Beth, from the screen.
Cool. Oh, I was like, there's a dog barking.
There is a dog barking.
Yes.
Yeah, so we can start with some reading. I'm not sure if I was going first, if you want to take it off.
I think you should go first.
Okay, all right. Let's do this. So I'm going to be reading from Fiore Tropical, which is my novel that just came out. So it's past March 2020. And if you have the book, I'm going to read from chapter 2, page 19.
Yay.
La Tata was obsessed with Don Francisco. South Gigante was Jesus before Jesus was Jesus. Even before moving to Miami, homegirl watched him religiously every Saturday, mumbling amorcitos from her rocking chair to the television. Back in Colombia, Tata had visions where she stepped onto Don Francisco's set in a glorious dress, spun the magic wheel, and won a car, or a kitchen set, or a vacation for two. She would hold my hand and say, "Ay, Mimi, te imaginas, you and I in a Disney World." Once in Miami, she called the 1-800 number several times, leaving detailed messages. Si niña, Alba, that is ALBA, si Alba, can you tell him to call me back? It's important. In Miami, the Galan Dream was closed. So close was Tata to having that Chilean-born papi read her name tag, call her from the audience, holding up his arm for her. Alba es la ganadora, he would say. Above everything, she wanted to be the winner. Of what? Of that moment of recognition, of that spotlight, of Don Francisco landing a faint kiss on her cheek. Tata would sit in the first row with the rest of the Cuban señoras, but she would be his favorite, the one with the special juju. She would have hung the photograph of Don Francisco with his arm around her next to the Blessed Woman of the Year certificate from church. If the never-aging papi called, she would wear the dark green dress and the only gold earring she still owned. She walked down the steps like she once did at Club Union in Cartagena, sending kisses this way, kisses that way, but this time she will mean it. Pero niña, dime se tumba lo casco. Y ahí estamos, on the couch, watching some señora hold Don Francisco's hand and with Tata's kitchen set. Mírala, Tata said, she doesn't even know how to spin the wheel. Mommy didn't understand how Tata prayed Jesucristo all day, then watched that low-class crop where fake Cuban blondes and huge cleavages dance around El Chacal and gifted people slimy kisses, kitchen knives, and trips to Kissimmee. And wasn't Tata supposed to be working with the arroz con coco? Didn't Tata understand that the baptism was happening soon and Mommy's hair needed 2 days of work? And nobody, and I mean nobody, was helping her. And why hasn't anyone checked their to-do list? Take it in. There are 3 baptism to-do lists. Tata used hers as a coaster. The other 2 were posted on the fridge, each of our names double underlined. Lucia and Francisca. Not even Lucia finished her endless list, which included stuff like baptism playlist, baby crosses from the dollar store, and cleaning Sebastian's face con el Lysol. We let mommy rant. I sat on the couch behind Tata, popping blackheads from her back. She paid me 25 cents a pop, money that never materialized, but I nonetheless sat every time she asked because I loved squeezing her back fat. I was the special chosen kid who got to squish my Tata's skin and liberate her from the horrors of blackheads and pus. If she was tipsy enough, she let me draw on her back with a black pen, and I always did. Once back in Colombia, she undressed for a medical checkup, the doctor gasping horror of the drawings of headless zombie women eating their babies that I had meticulously traced on Tata's back. Nurses were instructed to clean her immediately before the traumatized doctor could continue touching Tata's heart. And I'll finish right there. Thank you.
Thank you. The joy of coming into the book with this particular baptism, it's just like so solidly trippy. All right, so it began with a solitary trip by the fire 3 days later with a cautious less than 3-gram dose. When there's nothing to lose, there's not a lot to worry about. It was easy to trust a mushroom, to trust anything outside myself and the twisted will that had landed me in this desperate clearing. I placed a small amount of tobacco at the base of a candle, a common offering I'd been practicing since I was a teenager, taught to me by herbalists and indigenous ceremonialists. I burned copal and flat cedar. Lying down on the couch under a wool blanket, I waited. You need to stop seeing yourself as a sick person, the mushroom said. They spoke to me like this in fully formed sentences heard internally, like a memory. In your female form, you are the quintessential bedridden Victorian lady on retreat. Yes, it's true, I replied. I do come from a long line of sick women. My mother had polio, tuberculosis, cancer, diphtheria, Graves' disease. My grandmother had tuberculosis and a morphine addiction. Sickness is how I locate my ancestry. Oh, I'm so very sick, the mushrooms echoed, mocking me. You don't care that I'm sick? We're just waiting for you to stop pretending to be sick. But I actually am kind of sick. Take as long as you like. I wasn't sick, the mushroom said, but the Trader Joe's frozen Greek yogurt I'd been eating daily was causing inflammation in my hips. What was going on in my hips was jacking my neck up, and the somatic traffic jam was making me depressed and lethargic. The damage could be remedied with ginger. Ginger? Yes, ginger. Will you let us show you? An intricate, multi-dimensional golden temple with a Moroccan silhouette arose in front of me. It was vast and bejeweled with an empty throne at its center. As its architecture, I resent having to describe its Rococo attributes. I'll just say it whacked me with its beauty so thoroughly I was hyperventilating from its splendor. The mushrooms must like me for such a thing to arise. Maybe I'm good at this, I thought. Personal preferences were tossed in, like my favorite shade of aqua, found only in paint made from smithsonite, and contrasting garnet reds and lapis blues set side by side, emanating of threads, furniture, ground or fresh. Fresh is best. Keep it simple. I'm going to skip way ahead towards the end here. When I returned from the Horizons conference, it's a psychedelic conference where I spoke on a bill with Michael Pollan. I recommend riding on a Greyhound bus through West Texas while high on mushrooms. As I stepped off the bus, the sun reflected the sand-colored retro architecture buildings and hit my tripping eyeballs. I began walking down Buddy Holly Boulevard, passing antique stores with taxidermy animals and mattress stores, down to where the industrial-sized nightclubs cluster near the freeways, as they do in a dry town. I crossed the tracks like Wilma must have done 1,000,000 times, into a neighborhood where the yards were kept like southern graveyards. I snapped pictures of garden gnomes. A black man on a porch invited me inside for a beer as I walked by. I declined, too high to meet a stranger. The sidewalk crumbled, then fell away, and I continued walking in wet grass until the colorful resin surfaces of giant three-dimensional cartoon animals called me over to a yard behind a cattle fence. It was packed with circus detritus, actual props and sets from actual circuses that gave off the sweat of oil money, country music, and the drugs and alcohol that fueled what made it. I felt the presence of all the people who ever saw Lubbock from a vantage point of tripping, which is a lot of people. They were with me as I walked further by open fields of grass and towering cotton mills made of corrugated steel, old enough that Wilma, my grandmother, must have seen them too when she walked down this road on her way to meet Dr. Joel Prince at Caviel's, the first African-American-owned pharmacy in the United States. It was a little white building that now housed an African-American history museum. It was closed that day. My search over the years to uncover any details of my grandmother's history and that of Joel Prince, her husband, has gleaned almost no results. Over the years, I've written emails to historical societies and spent hours in the library archives and nothing. But there are other ways to investigate one's origins, psychedelics being one of them. I know what happened. All around me, in the language of ecstatic feeling, Wilma was imparting her knowings. Stark train tracks in the too bright sun are narcotic math. This is the crossing where my medicine lives. I know what happened, but that doesn't cure my longing to find another person to say they know what happened too. Downtown, a barber shop on the main strip advertised shoe shines. My boots were a mess from walking in the wet grass. I went in and sat in the red vinyl king's chair and put my foot up like a boss. The old man gave me a shine and complimented my boots and said, yes, they're good ones, dark brown with stitching that resemble a mushroom. I've got walking. It was a regular hangout, Colorado weed laws, weed legalization, and how people were going crazy on edibles and the kids were getting hooked, but whatever, it was bringing money and he was all for it. The barber, a young Latino man with a meticulous buzz cut, said weed had helped him, but it really wasn't his thing. It's okay, but yeah, I can't really do it like when I'm around other people, said another. I had the same conversation many times, people putting down weed in order to talk about weed because they love weed. Weed's not really my thing either, I said, lying. I have PTSD, the barber said. I'm a combat veteran and I've tried a lot of things to help me with it. There are studies on MDMA for PTSD in veterans, I said. I know, they love us for those studies. Nobody doesn't want to help a veteran, I said. One of the in the shop echoed the sentiment and mushrooms. The topic tends to open the door to other subject matter that is transgressive light, and people, including myself, tend to overshare. I know MDMA could probably help, the barber said. I mean, I did it once, at a party, and it was fine, but it's a chemical. I'm more interested in psilocybin mushrooms. It's surreal, no, that he said this. My excitement triggered an autistic flood of words about the shady history of MDMA, how it was trafficked from Israel to intentionally flood the US market by players who have a stake in the corporate game. Getting people dosed on it on a mass scale could have been part of an advertising campaign, I said. I don't trust that the CIA and the DEA aren't tied up in it and they bust people just to make it seem like the only safe way to obtain it is from your doctor. The barber knew all about it. He added more details and facts, obviously having read more than just the single article I was referring to. I told him I'd just spoken at a psychedelic conference and that I used to grow mushrooms in my house in New Mexico. Do that. I ever would in. I don't like doctors. I don't trust them, especially as a veteran. It's a joke trying to get any assistance at all. And then they say they have this new thing out there and it's like, yeah, we know it. So just do it already. I can just get it from a drug dealer if I need to, or even better, just grow it at home in my closet. I shared with him some tips on growing, gave him some names of online spore companies. The old man resurrected my boots beautifully with a shade of brown. He mixed himself from multiple containers he fished out of his box. He was quiet the whole time, taking it all in. The barber asked for my contact information. I gave it to him, saying that if he had more questions about growing, I'd be happy to help him out. I stepped into the sun in my moment to observe my own blown mind. Why was it blown? Our conversation countered a message I hear all the time within the movement, that psychedelics must be destigmatized in the minds of mainstream Americans, that we should take out the association with the counterculture and educate them that mushrooms can be infused in a clinical setting with a trained professional, a miracle medicine for epidemic level ills. Who exactly are these uptight people that say we need to educate? Not these men, working class people who are often living at ground zero of the opiate, who are familiar with the drug culture, the military, and tend to be very smart about drugs. They can't afford not to be. The population that is uptight about psychedelics, from my own experience, if I may be so vulgar as to use this label, are the liberal elite. They're the acquaintances who give me that look like, are you okay? Look, when I fill them what I'm in on what I've been up to. They are Michael Pollan, who preaches that we are not ready to decriminalize psychedelic mushrooms because more studies need to be done and thus are potentially dangerous and should be used only in a clinical setting. They are Rick Doblin from MAPS, who knows better but keeps silent and allows this doctrine to persist because this is a lie on which is lifelong project of corporate medical. Psychedelic plants and fungi have had their proving ground for thousands of years, and the evidence of their effectiveness as a medicine already exists, noted in anthropological texts and artifacts, and more importantly, in living traditions all over the world. We know this already. How many capitalist projects actively depend on human beings forgetting what they already know and possess in order for it to be sold back to them for a price? What my heart says is this: the mushrooms don't like it done that way.
Thank you for that read. You're frozen a little bit for me. I don't know if for other people you're freezing a little bit. Yeah,
Was I
maybe.
frozen over there? Not frozen.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, you're not serving. Am I back? Am I back?
Yeah, you were just frozen a little bit as we were talking.
Cool.
So I don't know if it's the internet, closer to the internet. Yeah. But thank you for that, which is well, so for everybody, if you all have questions, you can put them in the Q&A, and then at the end we can answer those. And Beth and I are just gonna talk a little bit right now about both of the books. So I love that there's so much. I mean, we went from like matrilineal to like tripping to like this barbershop, and I wanted to just ask you, like, what was the entry point into the narrative? Like, what was the first story that like entered you into writing this, into actually a kind of narrative?
Oh yeah, I would love to ask the same of you, because that is such a thing that tends to tell you when you have a book. It's that first piece, and the first piece is called The Walk in the book, which is a trip I did with Clement Hill Goldberg, who might be listening right now. And it was when we walked around the property and had like a trip that was the opposite of a lot of things that I've read about. Like, there wasn't any big giant epiphany slamming down on us. It was just, everything was itself in this really powerful way, in kind of a lateral field, almost like music. And it came out of my pen. You know, I wrote it and it came out fully formed. And I don't think I wrote anything else as good as that for like a year and a half, but it told me that I could write again, and that I had a commitment to attending to this thing that came. And so it really was the anchor for the entire book. Do you have a chapter that worked like that for you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I love hearing that, and also hi, Clem. And yeah, I mean, I love that there's like a specific experience that brings to life like a whole project. For me, it was my family did move to Miami, and they were evangelical Christians. And I remember a conversation that the pastor was having about baptizing dead babies. And it was more about naming them. So it was like, you know, you have to name your babies, even if like they're unborn, like you have to name them so they can actually like move on to like the celestial plane. And that was the explanation. We never actually went through with any sort of baptism, but the idea, when I was, you know, I was in grad school, and I was remembering that moment, and I was like, oh my God, I have to write into that. Like, I have to write into like in that imaginative space of like what would have happened if we had actually gone through. And then, you know, the characters just started getting bigger and bigger. Like, it was way bigger than
Yeah.
just the baptism story itself, right? Like after I wrote a short story, I was like, no, they need more space. These characters want to say way more. And so
Yeah.
I had to come back to the page to kind of like let them breathe.
Yeah.
And, you know, for them to tell the story. Yeah. And so I'm thinking about like also like storytelling, since we're starting with like the one specific story. And one of the things that I was thinking with your book was how there's the storytelling that you're like what you're telling, but then there's also the storytelling of the mushrooms, right? Like there's a very specific way in which there's all these images, and there's all like you're like the writing is so electric, and there's like such beautiful images, and you do such a good job at just kind of like conjuring feel, very grounded, right? Like very, very grounded feel. And I was wondering about that translation of the mushroom knowledge or the mushroom talking into like English.
Yeah.
You know, like into, because it's not,
yeah.
you know, it's like how, like your own storytelling and then the mushroom storytelling, and when they intersect, like what's that
Yes.
like?
I was talking the other day about this because somebody said, how do the mushrooms speak? And in the book, at one point I'm looking at a mountain and there's literally hieroglyphics on the entire mountain. And I'm thinking of a book that I read where a woman took 15 years of downloading 405 psychedelic trips and translated into an alien language. And I was like, oh, I hope that doesn't happen to me. I don't want to, I don't want that. But like, there's a way that I think the mushrooms intersect with your own prose style. So when I'm in a trip, I literally hear my brain form fully formed sentences that become the voice of the mushroom other. And I would say that's like tier 2 mushroom language, which is like a collaboration. And that is pretty consistent through a trip. Like I'll be sitting there and there's a lot of lines where I'll literally start talking, going like, Joan Didion needs to come over and sit in a fold out chair with a gin and tonic and be a little afraid of snakes. And it's like, that is the mushrooms, like, that's obviously my voice. That's Bett Williams there, but it's like I asked the mushrooms for help to help me write a book, and they showed up, and they're very witty, and they're, you know, so it's a collaboration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you feel that it's like when it actually leaves your body that it becomes real? Because I feel like sometimes I have a hard time if I'm high in like understanding which voice is actually like the one that is speaking from like an intuitive, beautiful place, or the one that is just my anxiety wrapped in there. So there's a difference when you actually vocalize something, right?
Yeah, well, there's like, you know, it was a guy, Eric Davis, who spoke and said, without humor and the vernacular, you could be crushed by the ineffable. Like you need to keep your style, you need to keep yourself, you need to keep your head. And so I think as an artist, it's been important to meet the mushrooms with my humble self and the skill that I have with language. And I feel that learning how to talk in general was a strange thing for me. Like I'm kind of on the spectrum, to say the least. And so like learning what is beautiful language has always come from teachings on the outside. It was never like, oh, I can just say something. It was like, what the heck is language? How do I put words together? And so there's the collaboration with the mushrooms has been about testing the resonance. I think it's really tuning into if a sentence has feeling, if it feels that it has an emotional impact, that's one thing. And then there's other times where the mushrooms just are full of bullshit, like they grow in shit. So there's what does Kathleen Harrison say? That mushrooms live on horse shit and prayers. So I think it's like horse shit and prayers. And so as an art, like maybe some people have this sense of like extreme sacredness, extreme holiness, but then I would be a musician, you know. But like with language, I think the human humble thing. Even in Maria Sabina's chants, like she's talking about clocks, she's talking about books, she's talking about the everyday things that she sees in her life and mixes them in with the uber holy, like dew on the leaves and all these things. So it's like, it's picking things from your ordinary life and bringing it up, up, up. And I sense that also in the detail of your words. Like you're telling a story, but like you're slamming all this like clothes and place, like the smells of a place, and it makes something altogether different going on than what you're sort of getting at with the story. But so that's what feels so psychedelic about your writing is that resonance of the unexpected that is very mushroom-like to me.
Well, thank you. I mean, it makes me think about what you're saying about having to learn language, like what is language? And I feel that then we maybe share a little bit of a process in that I had to learn English from the outside. And so like piecing it together, it's like, it is like, I'm able to like bring in things that I know from like also Spanish, but also the ways that I've heard English being spoken differently. And so like, I'm not inside. I didn't grow up feeling the texture of a language. And like, when you grow up inside a language, you feel it so much more different in your body.
Wow.
And so I really resonates with me that you talk about like bringing in some language for like from like the margins, and like that's how storytelling was built for me, and how this book was built. It was on language that I was finding on the streets. It was from language that I found my grandmother like phonetically saying stuff in Spanish that was in English, or my mom mispronouncing things, or just like overhearing things on the streets. And that's the language that is kind of like the buildup of this, which is language that's very much tossed aside, right? Like things that in general get seen as like inferior, like mispronunciations, books. Like I really wanted the book to be read with an accent, it's like how do you write something so that I can feel a mirror linguistically? And
I feel that rhythm so much.
And it's that, and it's like, but it was very much about like, what do I have access to? I don't have access to this like standard white English. I have access to all these other things, and so I'm bringing in from all the stuff that I know and trying to build something that makes sense for me. But yet again from the outside of English, right?
So do you write first do you write in English first?
I write in both. So I have my process is both. I sometimes go directly to the computer, and I sometimes write in a notepad. And if I'm writing it, then writing in a notepad is actually better, even though I don't do it that much. But like, it's the best way because I don't edit myself at all. I don't care. It looks really messy, and I write in Spanish a lot in it. And it's just like whatever comes, and it's just really bad writing, it's like terrible. But at least I'm just getting everything out, and it's there. And then when I pass it to the computer, like I'm able to edit and like start molding start pulling out stories from it. First it's just like a big vomit of whatever's in, and then you pull in little pieces that are like, okay, I can salvage this, and then like, let's see what we can make with this stuff. That's sort of it. How about you?
Well, you're sounding like a visual artist and a sculptor, the way you talk about it. And I can relate, because like, I do see what I write as kind of an assemblage. Like I'll see the vibrant pieces, and then I'll just put them together. And the wonderful thing about the mushrooms is there's a kind of logic to a trip, and it becomes its own arc. And so I think it was helpful in one, just creating, oh, here's a chapter because it's another mushroom trip. So I mean, I really needed some help to get writing again after like a 15-year break. And at first I felt so low self-esteem that I was like, I'll do a humble mushroom book, and then I realized like, oh, I'm a literary writer. And so all the challenges of meeting the mushrooms with what I know art is posed all these things. And so I think at least I had the structure of pulling myself out of a hole through a series of trips, and then and that created like a backbone for for all the other things, like my friend Ariana Rhines was like, this is a book about the internet, you know, in some ways, because like there's so much of what the book is that has to do with the place we're in, with just living on screens and wanting to have real experiences and meeting people that you meet through screens, and the weird socialization that happens, like post academia, trying to make a world. And so it ends up being about the moment we're in many ways. But you know, having a basis is really important, you know, like the theme was important, but then it was like, oh yeah, any theme ends up being a can of worms.
And with that, if you're talking about like every mushroom trip has an arc, and you don't even think about it, but you're right, it is like its own like narrative arc.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering about memory. And again, I go back to the fact that this book is so beautiful. The images are so stark and they're so vivid, and I am like swimming inside them, right? Like you do such a good job. And I'm like, how do you manage to convey this while you're tripping? Are you writing while you're tripping? Like,
no,
just like remembering afterwards, and like how's that process of remembering?
I think in a mushroom trip, there's like a moment where you go take a picture of this, and I remember my mushroom trips better than I remember yesterday afternoon. It's just sort of the nature of how it operates. And so, and the smell, yeah, like I think in trips, I'm always going, don't forget this. And that's the beauty of mushrooms, is that they are you can recollect everything. I always say that mushrooms don't lie like a lot of other substances, because of the nature of a psychedelic is actually just pulling back a veil. So you're actually seeing a real thing. I mean, granted, your whole unconscious in your brain and its garbage is flying around there, but it's not altered really by anything like, let's say, an opiate or even weed, I would say.
Wow. And it makes me also think about the structure. I kept trying to, I was like thinking about like how you were putting together all the different stories and the order that they were in. And I was wondering if it was like, if the driver was also the mushrooms. I was like, is this like the driver of the structure, and like how that process of organizing and releasing that information little by little, right? How do you do that? With something that feels very circular, right? Like we come back to very specific moments over and over and over again. There's a juniper tree that we come back to a lot. There's the dogs a lot. There's the ex a lot. There's all these moments that I feel like we go back to a lot. And I was wondering about how you thought about structure.
I think there's the center of the book where my dog Rosie is CIA, trying to get me to be a cult leader, and I failed miserably. And that was the hardest part to write, because it was just so many characters and so much of a mess, and it was also kind of a triggering, difficult time. So I turned that into a fictional magic, like a magic realist thing. And that was like the moment I had to just get that done to set the scene of like what comes after that. You know, if these things are going to help me, they have to help me. So I think there's a way, the logic of a writer's sense of narrative prose that is present in making a mixtape for somebody happened in the mushroom trips. Like I was always worried, like, oh no, what if I have a mushroom trip that tells me I need to like go volunteer in like, you know, another country or something, you know, that takes me away from the narrative. So I think it was, the mushrooms knew that I was trying to write a book, and so they always sort of gave me things. And the book is very about essences and medicine. So when I realized like rose oil and frankincense and Syrian rue and all these things work together, those were the moments of discovery, not necessarily these big dramatic things. It's like, oh, you know, I have these things that are now alongside me in my mushroom practice, and it's very small, but it really made me feel that I was learning how to do something properly. And learning how to do something properly was teaching me how to write a book properly. And then there was the voice in me that said, I need to say what mushrooms are about in an overarching way, which has been kind of nerve-wracking in a way, because as a rogue psychedelic user, there's so many things going on in the psychedelic movement, and it's been a process of realizing I can just have my own practice, and if it offers something to the culture as a psychedelic person to other psychedelic people, that's great. But it was like, that's what taught me that it's really the best way in my mind to do it is kind of on a rogue way with my friends. So the book taught me the book and writing it taught me how to do mushrooms. And we walked alongside each other, I think.
Wow, I love that. I mean, it's just like a very different way of understanding craft.
Yeah.
It's it's like such a like much more like spiritual and organic way of like understanding craft and like letting yourself be led by something outside of what's expected out of a template for a book.
I noticed with your writing as well, I call them sort of like little angels and essences, like the sensuality. Do you have certain like smells and things you associate with like the character Tati and Mommy, and like things that just might even like be horrifying to you or like attracted to that? Like, do you move in with like smells and place? Like, what is the realm of place in writing about a room and all that for you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely Miami. It's the smell was very stark, and like she, like myself, moved from Bogota, which is a place that smells and feels very different. And then you arrive at the swamp. You know, Bogota is up in the mountains. It's a cool city, and it's a big city. And then she arrives at this like suburb that is a swamp, and like it smells, and the smell of soil. I mean, I feel that. I still remember the moment that I got to Miami and they opened the doors, and that swampy heat just like hits you and you can barely inhale. You know, it's like it's incredible. And so I very much wanted to get that feel of the swampiness and how new it was for this girl, right? Like understanding that like the heat and all the senses are activated very differently because she has to like deal with this. There's also she's stunned by the air conditioning and the ceiling fan because it's something that she doesn't have there. So like there's very little moments that like are activating her senses. And then with the church, there's just a lot of the church feels itself like this grandiose thing, but it's like it never gets vacuum. It's kind of dirty. It always smells. And so there's this way that there's this like, kind of like oxymorons all the time within the spaces themselves. But yeah, I feel like the pooling of senses was really big in terms of place. Like I really brought in the memory of what it was to live in Miami and that sense of like swimming through jello when it's hot and it's asphyxiating, and the fact that like she is asphyxiated by what's going on, but also the heat itself is like another wrap around, like, you know, thing around her neck. Definitely,
When I saw you perform your piece about Vapor Rub at Sister Spit in Santa Fe, you're an incredible performer as well. And I realized listening to you that the mushrooms taught me how to speak language standing up to entertain my friends. And, you know, because like when you're in a tripping with your friends, you don't want to be boring. If you're going to say something, you got to like do it with style and with choice. And I was wondering if performance, if you think that's affected how you write, and do you perform or is it readings where it's been the center of performance, or do you do other kinds of performance?
I feel that performance it definitely has so much to do with my writing. It definitely has so much to do with the writing of this book. I mean, the book in itself is incredibly performative in its oral storytelling because it comes from the influence of performers in my life, and that goes from just not people who would stand on stage, but just the performers that I've had of like my aunties and my queer family that are incredible storytellers. Are just like the center of the family, right? Like I have like my queer mother who was a trans woman from Cuba, and her storytelling style is insane. She's not up on a stage, she's just on the couch, but she's like, she's huge and she will have you there the entire time. And so Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel that I have a lot of influence of nightlife and drag queens and that modality of making up language as you go to just make you sassy and campy and
Yeah.
funny and just making sense for your audience. I miss standing up on a stage so much, like
Yeah.
so much, and like dressing up and doing drag. I mostly just my performance comes through storytelling, and so like I
Yeah.
get up on stage to tell stories in in full face because it just brings
Yeah.
me a lot of joy. And it also comes from a tradition of people from Colombia who like traditionally do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I do think that performance has a lot to do. I don't know if you have experience with it or like how that other modalities of art have had influence in the book and in your writing.
Yeah. Well, it just hit me right now. I mean, there's a few trips in the book where I'm doing mushrooms with performers from the stud, and that energy was there. And I realized that I hadn't been a performer until I started tripping with my friends. Like even if I'm tripping by myself, I'm in a performance way. And like, it's said that mushrooms and LSD alter your personality permanently. And I was wondering if you feel that like writing has changed how you speak even just regularly. Because I realized that my ability to have language has been trained by the mushrooms, and it's something that I draw upon now all the time without thinking. Because it's like there's just a hyperfractal access, and I think tuning into these performers and the culture you're talking about, it's as if you're tuning into an oversoul of like all these things, nuance, humor, sensuality, survival, are all these things accessible because of culture. And I think mushrooms are good at that too. Yeah.
I mean, I will say that the first time that I did mushrooms, what I ended up doing, I was in Joshua Tree, and I was like literally narrating a telenovela between the rocks. Like well, the rocks usually, if I do mushrooms, the rocks are the ones that stick to me, but I was narrating a telenovela happening just between the rocks that were there, and I was just
Oh,
like
please come over.
calling the whole thing in and like emceeing for them and just
Yeah.
having the drama, and it was just like this beautiful, this like beautiful thing that was going on. I think that everything that it goes on with language and like both like verbal and like nonverbal in my life has a huge influence in my writing. It has a and like vice versa. But I think that I learned to speak English also by reading a lot. I didn't know how to, and it was through reading poetry that I learned a lot of English. It was just through reading that I was like, I'm getting myself out of this place. I'm getting myself somewhere through like writing and through reading and through like learning about language. And that's been my saving grace, is like writing and reading have really taught me to speak and to take myself somewhere else. That was like my ticket out of, my ticket out of hell in Miami was like, reading and writing. And so definitely, I think that all of it is completely interrelated for me. And I use all the different elements of my life. When I'm teaching writing, I usually also tell my students to just see the world as a text. So like, it's not only the reading, or it's not only all these things, but like the world itself is a text that you can incorporate into your own writing, And I see that in your book, definitely, like all of the things that make it into the book. There's so many things in the container that are like non-language, that are beyond language, but just like make it in through it, right?
Yeah. I love that. I love the idea of, because you think writing is like get your story out there, but like when you're seeing the world as language, like the door behind you with its like high sheen, has its own message, and like, are you going to include it or are you not? And you're a writer who includes, the things if the text is calling out to be included in the larger form. And that's how it's done.
Yeah, whatever called. I walk around my neighborhood like with a little notepad taking notes of just the way that people write their signs now. So like right now it's really interesting how people have, and I live in the Mission, so it's in English and Spanish, again, so it's that play with both. and they write signs for like, you know, their little stores in both English and it's just really fun. So I like take pictures of that, and that's what makes it into the book also, you know. So yeah, I mean, it's just paying attention, you know. It's a lot of just paying attention to the world and yourself and the things that are like activating you.
Did you like, were the pieces in Fibra Tropical on their own for a long time before they became a book?
They were, I think, yeah. I mean, I did not write, and I'm not a writer who just like plans it out and writes the whole thing, and it's not at all. This book was, it took me like 6 years. It was like really long and painful, and so there were stories that I was just writing here and there, and then like there's a lot of it that never made it. I mean, there's so much of it that never made it. You know, as it happens, you know, like it's just like there's so much, and I feel like as it should be for me, at least my process, it's like there's so much of it that I just need to let go of because that's not what the story's about. And it got me to that point, right? Like I needed to get through all this forest, through all this stuff to like arrive at that like little meadow, right? Like I need to get through all of these different things to like arrive at this place, but I need to be able to like take that out. And so, yeah, I mean, definitely is.
I gave my book to about 4 people to read when it was like a total mess, and it really was a mess. I thought it was done. Like I was like, oh, it's done. I can't do this anymore. Writing is very, I mean, I perceive it as difficult. You know, there's lots of difficulties, but like I was like, it's done. And boy, I had another 1.5 years work on that thing.
It's a lot.
Congratulations. I mean, and for your Kirkus Prize nomination.
Congratulations to you too. Thank
exciting.
you. Thank you. Should we maybe take questions if people have any? It's 7:45. We've been talking for a long time.
Tell me if I have
any questions. I don't know if Green Apple is doing that, but I can see a question and answer. There's only 5 of you guys, so you can ask us. Oh, hi, Max. Green Apple. But yeah, we can open it up to questions if people have any.
Any questions?
Comments?
I'll give a minute for some stuff out. But I do have one question. So for that, where were you finding a lot of your inspiration, I guess, just in writing in general, not specifically this book, but in other.
I think writing is a compulsion, and it's how I make sense of the world. I kind of tried to not write for a while, and it just was, it's I can't even say why I have to write. It's so hard sometimes. So it's not really about inspiration as much as it is meeting a task, which is meeting reality with my ability to make art out of it. So it's very probably Calvinist, pure, like Protestant work ethic kind of thing, rather than inspiration.
That's very sweet, though. Still have nothing.
Right.
And beauty is really important.
Of course.
Well, I have a last question for you then, but if people are not going to ask a question, I'll ask you one last question, which is about communing with other people and what the role. There's so many people that make it into the book that kind of like send the narrative into another direction, right? And Kai being one that is really important, and like Clem is also that is really important. Like kind of like sends the narrative in a different direction. And I just wanted you to maybe speak about that, kind of like communing with other people, both through the mushrooms and your own self-discovery, and also through the writing process of the book.
Well, I was thinking about what mushrooms are and why they are meaningful, and a psychedelic experience done alone kind of means nothing. And what the mushrooms do is they create their mycelium is like literally crossroads of relationship, like a web of relationship. And so I realized that my path with the mushrooms, every single step was a person who affected me, like literally, like my friend who said, let's go get some mushrooms. And I knew a guy at AA sold them, and I went to the meeting and got some mushrooms and we did them. And then what we experienced took me deeper into wanting to do them more. And then I felt a little lost, and I thought, how do I get out of this? I didn't think books. I thought, who do I find? What person? And psychedelics, like art, like you have to do it in community. And it generates community on its own. Like being a painter's nothing without a community of someone to show it to. And so that mycelial thing is how we live as humans, but it can become very literal in terms of like, you literally either have to grow the mushrooms yourself or you have to find someone to buy them from. So they're just relational no matter what. And like when you're high, like a juniper tree is going to be like more than a tree. So I think mushrooms represent relationships. So the book is a book of relationships.
Yeah, I see that. And I see that beautifully, and you wrote it really beautifully. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if folks don't have any other questions.
Yeah. Thanks for.
I don't have any more.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
It's been wonderful speaking to you and
Yeah.
seeing you again.
Hi, Juli. I hope to see you in New Mexico.
Okay.
Bye.
All right, bye.
If I may close this out, this book again is available in-store purchase, or on the website as well. And yeah, it helps us out as a store and helps us continue to put on events like this, and it supports the authors who really truly do put in like a lot of time and energy towards writing amazing books like this, and plus you get a new book out of it. So again, thank you guys for joining, and it was really amazing hearing everything, just this discussion, and this is truly a wonderful book, and I know I'm actually going to buy a copy for myself tonight. So again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Bye, Bett.